Welcome back to Two Nobodies, everyone. Rupesh is here again. I have a wonderful guest today, who I'm excited to talk to, Kelsey Walker, founder of From the Green Desk. Kelsey, welcome to Two Nobodies. Really appreciate having you, especially on a Sunday morning. I know that's not always a great time to record, and especially a topic that I'm keen to learn more about and might be sensitive for a lot of folks, but just I think it's absolutely something that I think we want to talk about. So thank you for joining Two Nobodies today, and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And so I think you said when I read your bio, grew up in Kansas City. Is that right? And now you're in Chicago. Is that right?
So I spent the first 10 years of my life in Kansas City and then the second
Okay.
8 or so in Chicago. And then I
Okay.
moved back to Kansas City a couple years ago.
Okay. And so I've never been to Kansas City. What is Kansas City like?
It's a very spread out metropolitan. It's not like a
Okay.
Chicago where everything's very vertical and you see
Right.
skyscrapers. There's only a couple of really
Right.
tall buildings and then everything else is spread out, kind of like St. Louis is. But lots of arts, lots of philanthropy, and just an overall wonderful place to be in. It's spread across two states, so we border both Missouri and Kansas with the Kansas City area.
Okay. Yeah, I always got confused with that because I think at first glance you think Kansas City is a part of Kansas, but it's part of Missouri.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So your family, they grew up in the South. Then is that where you,
Yep.
for the most part, or
Yep,
yeah?
most of our family's here. Every we had kind of transplanted up to Chicago for my dad's job when I was growing up, so everybody came back to Kansas though in the last few
Okay.
years. So, and to Missouri. So we're all here now.
Nice. And then founder of From the Green Desk. I want to hear about that story, but lead me to just when that point started to happen. But also, I'm curious about just what did you do for school, or what was that like? Kind of just getting to that point of becoming the founder From the Green Desk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to school at Kansas State University. After living in Chicago, I decided I wanted to be closer to home, which was
Yeah.
still about 3 hours away. So I had a good buffer to do some growing and things like that. I actually studied wildlife biology when I was in college
Okay.
because I did medical search and rescue working New Mexico summers. So,
Hmm.
a very diverse kind of thing. And what I found while I was working those jobs and studying my major is I really loved the nonprofit world and the nonprofit sector. So
Hmm.
after I graduated, I started working for the Boy Scouts immediately, and then really just fell in love with philanthropy and fundraising and getting volunteers involved and getting people involved in nonprofits as a whole. I've worked for the Y, I've worked for the Kauffman Foundation, a little bit of everybody, and really fell in love with writing and grant writing. And
Hmm.
so my career has just kind of progressed over the last 12 years to becoming this nonprofit founder. And in between there, so in 2021, I wrote my first book called Face Everything and Rise. It is my memoir about the loss of our daughter Hope. At
Hmm.
17 weeks pregnant, we found out she had osteogenesis imperfecta type 2, which is the lethal version of brittle bone disease. So
Okay.
all of the bones in her body were broken at 90-degree angles. Her ribs were breaking in on her heart and her lungs. And my husband and I made the difficult decision to have an abortion at 18 weeks because she was not having a good quality of life, and I was also, my life was being threatened by her condition as well.
Mm.
So we made that difficult choice, and the memoir details out what happened during the procedure, the mental health and post traumatic stress I just developed from the laws that caused me to be traumatized by the procedure. So some of the things that happened during the procedure were they asked me 6 times if I wanted to go through with it, and that is required by law, by Kansas law.
Okay.
They also gave, because they're not in a full hospital, they're in a clinic, they can't knock you out all the way with an anesthesiologist during the procedure.
Okay.
And so they gave me something called midazolam, which is supposed to help you forget the procedure and make you feel sleepy. But the thing is, every time I fell asleep, I would stop breathing. So they had to keep waking me up. So I remember everything from the procedure.
Mm.
And on top of that, again, that's part of the law is it can't be in a hospital or the hospital will lose funding. Um,
Mm.
so um, another piece of it was that my husband was not allowed to be in the room with me during the last leg of that procedure.
What?
Yeah, so I didn't was not able to have, well, during the hardest part of it, where they were actually separating me from our daughter Hope. He was not allowed to be in the room with me, and it's not the fault of the caregivers. They were doing everything that they could, and they were very
Right.
compassionate the whole time. One of the nurses held my hand the whole time and like kept eye contact with me, but it just it's not the same as having your loved one there with you.
Of course.
So, uh, Face Everything and Rise is about that. And then it took years and years of therapy and, finding support to really get back on my feet again. And finally, I started EMDR therapy in 2021.
Mm.
And it's a specialized therapy for post traumatic stress.
Right.
And it made just a world of difference. And it made me strong enough that I could go to the Women's March in Kansas City in October of 2021. So at this point, I had already been writing my book for about 4 or 5 months. Amazon
Mm-hmm.
had reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'll publish your book." And
Mm.
I was like, "Okay, but I don't have an ending yet." And they said, "We'll help you figure it out," and which was pretty cool. Um, so I went to the Women's March and I carried a sign that said, my baby was suffering and dying, and I would have died. Read the truth. And I built a website surrounding my story. And at the time, I was just going to start a blog called From the Green Desk.
Right.
And when I went to the march and carried the sign, I was scared because my husband had to be at a football game for our son. So he
Okay.
couldn't be there with me. Um,
Okay.
I was by myself, but what
Right.
I found was that multiple women, when they saw my sign, would hold their hand to their heart and just ask me questions about it. Ask me if that was my story, and I'd tell them my story. They'd embrace me. Pandemic be damned. They gave me. There were lots of hugs.
Yeah.
People prayed over me, which was hard for me because I had a whole experience surrounding churches with this piece, which I can get to in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an amazing experience, and it healed me finding that community and finding these
Mm.
people that were willing to kind of let me be open and share my story with them.
Just complete strangers
Yeah,
too, right?
complete
Yeah.
strangers. Let me find community in them,
Mm.
and it healed my heart. And that's how Face Everything and Rise ends, is with them helping me find that strength to rise in complete strangers, which is amazing.
Um, thank you for sharing. First of
Yeah.
all, I knew we were going to get to that story. I just didn't know we were going to get to it so quickly,
Yeah.
and I feel like I could just just hand over the mic because you like it was just um, you got to many points that I was going to ask you about, and um, I, I guess I must admit, maybe I can be a little vulnerable
Yeah.
in a way here, is that I think for me, if we didn't set up this conversation, I don't know if I would have the courage or the understanding of even how to approach somebody who's gone through such a loss,
Yeah.
right? And so just the way you kind of the way you've expressed it, just in that short amount of time, I was really nervous to have this conversation. I was telling my wife, I was like, I have these questions set up,
Yeah.
but how is this going to even unfold,
Yeah.
right? Like, I feel confident talking about many other things, but this is someone I've never met before, and they're expressing themselves. And so I appreciate the way you've just facilitated this and enabled me to be in a safe space to have this conversation because I was frankly very nervous to see how this would unfold. Um, there's a lot that you said that I want to unpack. There's certainly the stuff around just state laws and just the legal system that didn't seems like I don't know. It sounds like it wasn't very supportive at all, and maybe it's not, and it's still not supportive. And I know that there's some stuff happening in the U.S. when it comes to abortion and restricting further rights at the state level, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. For sure.
So I do want to unpack that. Um, just the loneliness I imagine that you would have felt without having your husband. Um, that that in itself is heartbreaking. What year did this happen, Kelsey?
2017. So
2017.
almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years on September 1st.
And you have, I think I read on your website, you have two children now.
I
So
do.
would this have been was this your first or was this,
She was in the middle.
she was in the
Yeah.
middle? Okay. And then, so after losing hope, what was that process like for you to say that I want another one? Was that a hard decision for you?
That was so Ember, our youngest, she's 3 now. It was a surprise.
Okay.
I was on birth control. We didn't weren't intending on getting pregnant again
Yeah.
because of the trauma that I was going through. But Ember, prolifically is, comes on her own time and does what she wants to do. And being pregnant again was very triggering because, I spent all this time trying to find medications that work to control my post traumatic stress
Mm,
response and my depression surrounding the loss. And when you're pregnant, you can't be on those medications.
right.
So, being off of those and having, my body was the trigger for all of this. And, the fear and the terror surrounding being pregnant again was hard. I think that the biggest saving grace, though, was early on. We had gotten, when, when we were still pregnant with Hope, during that 10 days that we had from finding out there was something wrong to having the abortion, we got a amniocentesis done to get genetic material from her and me to find the marker where the OI was.
Mm,
So that way, when we became pregnant with Ember, we were able to test Ember, at 13 weeks or so, for that genetic marker, and it came back clear. And so we were so,
what a time that would have been, I would imagine, for you, Kelsey, when to just wonder what the test results are going to be.
yeah.
I'm assuming there would have been a ton of fear and
Oh yeah, it was lots of fear, lots of nervous pacing at the time.
yeah,
But I mean, tears of joy and tears of relief when we found out that she didn't have that genetic marker, and
yeah,
found out that she was a girl at that time too, because that far in advance you can find out with genetic
right,
testing. So it was it was a relief. And but there's still a fear because even at, I think it was at 19 weeks, I actually, or so, I actually bled with our daughter Ember. It turned out I had a cyst left over from Hope that just broke,
Okay.
and
Okay.
so I was bleeding a lot, and it was really scary because that is something that when you have kids, they're like, go to the emergency room.
Yeah.
There's a chance that you could be losing, and so we went, and it turned out it was okay, but
Okay.
it was terrifying. It was just flashbacks, nonstop for 2 days while that was happening.
Did you grow up in a family that like what were the views on abortion, I guess, growing up? Was it fairly conservative? Was it very open minded, or like what were the views or approach on abortion, I guess?
Yeah, so my mom is Catholic and my dad
Okay.
is Jewish, so two very different kind of viewpoints, but overall they were very conservative. And
Mm.
so very early on I was very rebellious and was very um, liberal. And when I was young, I didn't, I was very much so pro-choice and really was very much so my body, my choice at the time. Not,
Mm.
but it took until having the procedure to understand what those words really mean.
Mm.
And while my family was conservative, my parents were the first ones to reach out when we found out what was going on with Hope, and my mom very much so saw it as a way of saving my life and
Yeah.
completely supported us in that decision. We actually kept, other than my parents, we kept the decision that we had to make and the procedure that we had to make from our families until 2021 when my book was coming out.
Okay.
Because on my husband's side, they're incredibly conservative, and are very much so, two of his brothers are pastors.
Mm.
It was, a very scary, thing, but when we did finally tell them, they were completely supportive because it's an impossible choice to make, and it was a choice to save my life, and that is kind of what they've kind of have used to wrap around it to understand it and be supportive around
Yeah.
it. So it's been new and interesting to see the way the family, there's a couple of the family members that have read the book, and there's a couple that have not. Um,
Mm.
because it's hard. My older sister's read it, and she's like, it's really hard to read because you're my sister, to see you
Right.
in that much pain
Right.
and see everything that really happened. But at the same time, it is very informative because there's so much like propaganda out there. There's so much just garbage that, like, when I was going in to get the procedure done, I had no idea what to expect, because if you try to Google what's a dilation and evacuation, all kinds of crap comes up. Like, you can't, there's no clear cut like WebMD thing that you can find that tells
Mm.
you what to expect. So
So on that, what were some things that maybe you thought you knew going in, but was very different?
yeah, the way that the media kind of reflects abortion is that it's like a quick in, quick out kind of thing,
Mm.
and that it's a minor surgery, and that it's like it's very it's all very downplayed, that it's like a quick solution kind of thing.
Mm.
But it's an all day affair. You go in at 7:30 in the morning, and you're not done until around 5,
Wow.
because at 7:30 in the morning, after you're fasting all night, which as a pregnant person, it's very hard to fast. Um, you're fasting all night, and then you get there at 7:30 in the morning. They check your vitals. They make you go through another ultrasound, which we had
Mm.
already been through a 2-hour ultrasound with Hope days earlier to look at view every single
Right.
broken bone. It's like I did not need to do that again. But
Why, from their standpoint, did they feel like they needed to?
the law requires it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the law requires it. So they did it again, and then they start the procedure, and if this is a little too graphic, you can cut it out, but they insert bamboo shoots into your cervix, and they break your
Okay.
water, and then they do that, and you have to wait about 4 to 5 hours to wait for labor to be induced and for your body to recognize that. And for us, that meant, my parents were very supportive and helpful during the procedure. They actually got us a hotel nearby because we actually lived 3 hours away from the clinic.
Okay.
So, and they were worried that, if I have the procedure that I would like throw a clot or something, going back and forth in a day.
Yeah.
And luckily we had that hotel room because I had to just wait and start getting contractions and stuff for 4 or 5
So
hours.
you're not in the hospital at this point then.
No, you're not in the clinic.
Okay.
You
Okay.
they
Clinic. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they let you go because they don't have anywhere to put you for 4 to 5
Okay.
hours.
Okay.
So then you come back, and the problem was when I came back, there was another emergency in the other room. Because
Mm.
what happens when they discharge you from one of these procedures is they give you 4 phone numbers for support. They give you the suicide hotline, the abortion support hotline, which is a lot like the suicide hotline, a psychiatrist in Overland Park, which again is 3 hours away from us. Telehealth wasn't really a thing yet, so it wasn't exactly a helpful
Mm-hmm.
resource for me at the time. And then the after hours clinic number, because if you go to an emergency room after you have this procedure, they won't know how to treat you
Mm.
because they're not practiced in it. So you have to,
Really?
yeah, an emergency room doctor will not know how to treat you after you have a D&E. So you have to go back, you have to call the after hours number, and you have to come back to the clinic. So, like, if you start bleeding crazy or something happens, so there was an emergency going on when I came back, and so we had to wait for another hour. And I'm in active labor at this point. Um, it was really hard. And then they did the procedure, and they gave me the midazolam, so I don't know exactly how long, but it was around 4:30 or 5 o'clock when everything got said
Yeah.
and done. What was another thing that was interesting that I didn't know to expect, or I thought to expect, was the protesters outside of the clinic. I at 7:30 in the morning, they didn't show up, but when we came back, they were there. But they never
And
got
are
to.
they just they're just there normally, or
Yeah,
did they? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
they're normally they're outside of like the sign where the clinic's at,
Yeah.
on the road. And I was lucky enough that my husband is 6'5". He's a big man, and
Okay.
my dad, who is 6'3", but he was a lineman for K-State back in the day.
Okay.
I had 2 huge men with me that were
Right.
not going to let anything happen to me,
Yeah.
so they left us alone for the most part.
Yeah.
But I did not even though people say that they're there, like, I just didn't expect that. What was interesting was that I months and months earlier, I had actually gone to Planned Parenthood to get my IUD removed so that we could conceive Hope. And that's when I ran into the protesters at Ernest. And I was like, I'm
Mm.
trying to have a baby at that point.
Mm.
So it was a weird experience to encounter them again when when we were losing her. So
The protesting, like, I mean, we've tried to refrain from a lot of judgment on our show, but it just
Yeah.
seems like a very disrespectful approach, right? Like not even willing to try to understand someone's situation and sit with them a little bit before, even if you have really strong views, whatever that is, right? But just
Yeah.
not having any sort of empathy or compassion for people in that moment, and to really be in their face in such a way is very disrespectful. It's
Yeah.
just horrible to hear that you experienced that. And I mean, had you not had, you know, two people in your life that physically could protect you, there's probably, I'm assuming there are a lot of women who walk out of those clinics who probably feel very, very vulnerable and afraid to have to
Yeah.
walk through a gauntlet of protesters. Like, how disrespectful and horrible is that?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's, you know, people don't get abortions because they're, it's an easy solution. They get it because they have no other option. And, it's a decision that isn't taken lightly by anyone who needs
Mm-hmm.
this as healthcare. And so for someone to, slam them and be there when it's really a decision that's between them and their doctor is just, it speaks to their humanity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So,
Hmm.
well,
Uh,
and, you know, we had some challenges with churches surrounding, speaking of that kind of judgment,
yeah.
surrounding churches when it came to losing hope. Um,
Can I ask before you get into that?
yeah.
Do you and your husband, are you practicing, and are you very strong in your faith? Like, what does that look like for you folks?
So, I am Jewish.
Okay.
My husband doesn't, like, we both are kind of more spiritual, don't
Yeah.
practice a whole lot. Um, but when you're faced with this kind of situation, when anyone's in a foxhole like this, you definitely look for God. And that's what we tried to do.
Mm.
Um, when we got Hope's ashes back, which was just like a quarter worth of ashes, back from her, I called 7 different churches to try to get her ashes blessed, and to try to have a funeral because we couldn't afford like a traditional funeral for her. Because I worked for a nonprofit, my husband worked for the school district. It just was not in the cards for us. So we were hoping that maybe, a church would have mercy on us. And I called 7 churches, and all 7 said no. Because she was a aborted child, they would not respect those wishes. And so that was incredibly painful. And then, when I was looking for support, again, working for a nonprofit, needing, I wanted like some kind of support. So they told me not to stray off those 4 phone numbers, but there's only so many times that you can call the suicide hotline. You really need
Right.
someone physically there to talk to. And so I found an abortion support group,
Mm.
or at least what I thought was an abortion support group, phone number, and I called it. And this guy was really empathetic and, told me to come meet him at this church with a pastor. And so my husband and I did. And they let me tell my story, and then they got up in my face and told me, we might pray for your daughter, but you're going to go to hell for what you did.
Oh my goodness.
So that kept me for about, from looking for any more support or any more help for about 2 months. I refused to like
Mm.
go to a psychologist because I was scared. I refused
Well,
to go.
they're also not cheap, right? To
Yeah,
go
they're not
to,
cheap.
right.
Yeah,
So,
we couldn't
yeah.
really afford it.
Yeah.
I refused to like reach out to any more churches because I was like, I'm done being burned.
Yeah.
And so I just sat there night after night with flashbacks and suffering and depression. And it took my husband, going like you can't live like this anymore. And he found a therapist that was willing to work with us financially.
Mm.
And he reached out to them and got the appointment set up. And my first appointment was like 90 minutes long because it just all
Mm-hmm.
came out in a
Came out.
deluge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's just been a challenge. And again, it was, you think about churches as this place of hope and healing. And again, it was a testament to their humanity or lack thereof
Mm-hmm.
to help a mother who was grieving a great loss. So I still, it took me until 2 years ago probably to start doing Jewish holidays with my son again, because I just felt so separated from God in
Probably
those
felt betrayed, I
moments.
would assume too.
Yeah, betrayed for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So,
The atrocities and hypocrisy that happens in the name of religion sometimes is beyond me. Like, I think there's so much beauty in every religion that there is. There's always beauty to be
yeah.
found. But then, we're in Canada right now. I don't know if you've heard, but the Catholic Church um, has a very dark history with Indigenous peoples here in Canada,
Oh,
and they I think it was I want to say maybe August or the fall of last year. Um, there was a dark history in Canada, something called the residential schools. It's where the Catholic Church actually took children away from Indigenous parents and put them into schools and forced them to, learn the ways of the Catholic Church and essentially take the savage out of the Indian child is sort of how they would frame it. It was terrible. But anyway, but
yeah.
more has come out of this in that they've found unmarked graves under a lot of these residential schools, hundreds and hundreds of children under all these schools. It's a huge atrocity in the name of the Catholic Church. And Indigenous peoples in Canada, they recently visited Pope Francis
Hmm.
to seek an apology, and Pope Francis did issue an apology, and they're looking for more. But I guess that's just not with the Catholic Church. That exists in all religions. People.
Yeah.
I find that people saying this in the name of a religion and say that something is right, and there's no compassion or empathy behind things. That goes against the principles of many of the religions, but there's such a power dynamic there that they feel that they can just take advantage of people. I'm sorry that it's troubling to hear that, but it's also I'm not surprised to hear that too, which is sad to hear. Sad to say, I should say, but that's very very troubling that would have happened. How is the healing for you now? Like, what does that look like for you? What's your take care of yourself kind of routine, or what does that look like?
Yeah. Now, working through EMDR still has been part of the routine.
Yeah.
Um, and founding from the green desk has been part of the routine as
Mm.
well. Because, my whole being for the last 12 years has been giving back to community and working through the nonprofit sector. And that's how I channel my emotions. That's how I
Mm.
channel the way that I grieve. And they've found that it's another step in grieving is finding meaning.
Mm.
And so after my encounter with the Women's March in October of 2021, I realized that, I had women that were reaching out to me that were saying, we didn't have this community either. Wouldn't it be great if you could start something to create this community? And I said, I could do that. I've worked for nonprofits for so long. How hard could it be?
Yeah.
um, and there are definitely some hoops that go with starting a new nonprofit, but it's nothing that isn't worth the challenge to found this nonprofit. And so From the Green Desk was founded because I literally work from a green desk. I wrote the book from this green
Okay.
desk. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but
Oh yeah, I can see in the corner there. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I do the work from this green desk. And what it does is we provide individual one-on-one coaching for women and folks who have gone through abortions or lost children or lost pregnancies, as well as provide group therapy
Mm.
for women who have gone through these losses. We also have a blog, and then coming soon a podcast. I wanted to release it back in March, but there's only so much bandwidth that goes that you
Oh,
can explore at a time. But something else that we're going to also be starting here in the next couple of weeks is narrative meditation.
what is
So
that?
so it's something new that I've come up with, and basically it's a way of unlocking your layers of your story, whether it's trauma, whether it's loss, and going through the different levels and being able to find the words to write it down
Mm.
and just get your story off of your chest and into the world. And whether that helps people write a book or that helps people just get it off of their chest. It's kind of like narrative therapy in a way,
Okay.
but and, I'm not a licensed therapist, so I can't, of course, call it therapy. But uh, I call it narrative meditation because there's a part of it that is you finding a quiet space and exploring this, exploring the trauma as well as exploring the safe places of your mind to get it out on paper.
Very
So,
cool.
and all of the services that I have are free of charge to people who need them. So,
And so are you just seeking grant funding then, I guess, like and to fund your organization then?
yes, so part of it is seeking grant funding. Part of it, I also have a fundraiser coming up in June.
Okay.
So, yeah, June 11th, myself and two other women led nonprofits are having a night to empower with her in capital letters at the end of empower. Um, and it's going to be myself and four other folks that are going to speak on their stories related to reproductive rights,
Mm.
domestic violence, as well as ending period poverty.
Okay.
So, a couple of different topics. There's going to be some food and drink trucks available for folks to indulge in for before and during the intermission, and it's going to be a powerful night for folks on June 11th.
June 11th. I'll have to
Yes.
make our way to Kansas City on June 11th.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun time. You know, it's going to there's going to be some powerful stories, and there's
Yeah.
going to be some good things to be had there. And then my last bit of fundraising right now is we're doing the 50 States Challenge.
Yeah.
So what that is I am taking my memoir,
Okay.
and I got it printed at cost, 150 copies, and I am mailing them to every senator, governor, the president, the Supreme Court justices, and sending it to them to rewrite the narrative that they have in their heads surrounding reproductive rights. Right now, the
Wow.
narrative very much so surrounds this kind of slut shaming, like it's loose women going and
Mm.
sleeping around and getting abortions, and that's
Mm.
just not true.
Mm.
It's people who need this as healthcare, and my my point of doing this is not to sell books; it's to get these people who are making these laws to wrap their head around reproductive rights as healthcare. and how important it is, and put a face to what they're putting laws around.
Good for you. When you're
Thank you.
writing these envelopes with these books in them, and you see some of these senators' names, and you know they're just probably not gonna they're probably
Yeah.
not gonna open it. Like, what is that? How does that make you feel? Or are you just like, F it, I'm gonna do this. Like, this is important. But
Honestly, I feel that, it is their choice whether to open the book or not, and it is their choice whether what they make as the decision after they read the book, if they
yeah,
do.
yeah,
And that's a testament to their humanity and the decisions that they're making. So if they didn't pick up the book because they don't feel that it's valuable enough for their time, that's again a testament to their humanity. If they did pick up the book and they're still making these laws and wrapping it around these clinics to constrict them and kill them off, that is their testament to humanity and
mm,
why we should or should not be voting for them to be in place.
yeah, for sure. Maybe if you, I don't know if you know much, but it would be helpful for me. I don't know enough about U.S. federal law and state laws around abortion. Like, what's the sort of what does U.S. federal law sort of encompass, and how does it touch on reproductive rights and abortion, and then versus state laws? Do you have a sense of that, and would you mind kind of explaining that to folks who are listening?
Yeah, so federally, the right to an abortion is currently protected,
Okay.
but it's very much so under threat. Um, Even in December, I got my book published in December because I wanted to make sure that it was out there before the Supreme Court went to debate Roe v. Wade
Mm,
again
mm-hmm.
in December, and then they're ongoing debating it right now.
Mm,
I even got a news alert on my phone today that said what you should do to prepare for a post Roe life. And I was like, it was so triggering. I had to
mm,
put my phone down. And so while it's okay right now, it's under threat. Um, and what we've also found at the state level is since the war with Ukraine and Russia has started going on, which we should be paying attention to
mm-hmm.
it. It's
Mm-hmm.
an atrocity.
Mm-hmm.
But since that started, there's been 4 or 5 states that have overturned reproductive rights in their states. So,
Because there's an
um,
opportunity to kind of bury it under the news of the war in Ukraine. Okay.
yep, watch while one hand is doing
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
and the other hand is going to do something else.
Right.
So that's been happening all across the country, and it's also going to happen in Kansas, where where I actually had my abortion done. They are trying, it's written into the state constitution that there is a right to that, and they are trying to amend that constitution to take it out. And then I don't know if you know too much about Texas, but Texas has the heartbeat bill that they passed
Okay.
into law back in November. And it was really because of the heartbeat bill, the happenings of the heartbeat bill, as well as the things going on in Mississippi, that I started writing my book because I was so outraged that I was like, I can't keep this in anymore.
Mm,
And it came pouring out of me in 6 months, from beginning to end of writing this book. And um, in Texas, the heartbeat bill means that after 6 weeks, when they can detect any kind of heart activity in a fetus, you can no longer have an abortion. And at 6 weeks, most women don't even know
don't
that
even
they're
know.
pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened in Texas recently that came out in our news was there was a woman named Anna who at 18 weeks pregnant, her water broke, and she went to the hospital, and the doctor said, well, you really need this D&E, which is the same procedure that I had, because the baby was malformed, and was dying, and because she was in the state of Texas, she couldn't get the procedure that I
Mm,
had. And because she was in the state of Texas, she had to wait to see if her body recognized it and miscarried, and hope that she didn't get an infection that could kill her.
Mm.
Because there's other women, now that I've been, reaching out and talking to some other women, there's a woman in Egypt who had a missed miscarriage that took 6 months for her body to recognize that it was miscarrying. And she went into septic shock.
Oh.
And so this woman in Texas, Anna, she survived, so that's good, and her body recognized it and miscarried. But there's a real chance that it wouldn't have ended up that way. There's a real threat to women's lives that comes with the laws that they're wrapping around these clinics and starting to, strangle these clinics.
And we're seeing a lot of these, like the changes in state laws are happening mostly in like Republican controlled states, would you say? Or
Yes. For instance, the state that I'm living in now is Missouri,
okay.
and they've all but removed abortion from Missouri. And recently, a woman, Republican, actually proposed a law to criminalize abortion. So if a woman has an abortion, and this is also happening in Texas, where there is a $10,000 bounty put on someone's head if they find out that they've had an abortion, and it goes on their criminal record.
So states have an influence on the criminal code, I guess, because like in Canada, for instance, the criminal code is controlled by the federal government. Provinces here
Mm-hmm.
don't have any input on the criminal code, but in the U.S., states can have like they have their own criminal codes. Or
Yes.
okay,
Yes. So, and it's that way for like cannabis across the states as
right, okay, yep,
well,
yep.
and things like that. Their way of criminalizing some things versus not is controlled in the states as well as at the federal level.
So what will this do if, because if I'm thinking about my understanding of what the map looks like in the United States, but if it is a lot of these Republican-controlled states, that's a lot of the southern states in the U.S.
Yep.
What is that going to do for women who like need help and need access to these services? Like, where are they supposed to go? And like you said, like in your case, for instance, which you said that after they induced you, you had to wait and you couldn't stay in the clinic, and for you that would have meant 3 hours, away. But luckily, you're able to stay somewhere nearby. That's not. I'm assuming that's not always the case for everybody, right? Like I'm assuming access here is at really a threat for a lot of women.
Absolutely. It's at risk. It's, you know, it's upsetting, but they started calling Kansas a destination state after Texas fell because people were driving from Texas to Kansas, which is not a short drive. It is 8, 12 hours,
Mm.
to Kansas from Texas, and from some of the different cities, and it's going to be like that for other states. These long distances, which is not feasible for everyone. So it's financially, medically, and so it's going to start becoming a life or death situation for some women who are like me, who need it as healthcare to keep themselves from being at risk.
Yeah. Uh, it's funny to me that like well, even in Canada, the abortion conversation seems to be creeping up a little bit. It's been
Hmm.
there was before current Prime Minister Trudeau, there was Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he was led the Conservative Party, and he made it very clear that we would not bring up abortion as one of our platform issues and wouldn't make it a talking point as part of any future federal campaign because Canada has moved on. But
Yeah.
more recently, that's not really the case. There's been this emboldened, voice coming out of, the very social conservative circles in Canada of let's talk about abortion again. And, that it seems like the abortion conversation was always there within the United States, but would you say something has changed in the last few years that where it's really people feel more emboldened or feel more passionate, or maybe they have the space to even like obviously laws are changing, but has something changed, I guess, over the last few years that has made this conversation more, not even conversation, that just restricting rights around abortion and reproductive rights is that has something changed to enable that, would you say?
Well, a lot of it changed with in the last few years with the bringing on our current or our previous president,
Mm,
Donald Trump.
mm,
There was all of a sudden a lot of, you know, to put it in less of a brazen way, but a lot of boldness
yeah.
surrounding conservative issues and a lot of lack of respect for women's and reproductive rights.
Mm,
And so that has been under threat. And then also having Trump put two more conservative
mm,
people in the Supreme Court seats, that has caused, all of a sudden now there's, that is the majority in the Supreme Court.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, you know, it has caused a lot more feeling of boldness for the Conservative Party. And it's kind of like they see the opportunity, so they're going to strike while the iron's hot. And, that's, again, it's hard and it's life threatening to some people who need this.
I've heard that Trump's one of his biggest legacy items is the impact he's had on both the federal and state courts. Like he's really
Yeah.
him and the Republicans and Mitch McConnell have been able to really aggressively change the face of the court system in the United States at all levels. And so yeah, that doesn't help as well.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And you know, we thought we would see some relief having a more liberal president come in, but
Mm.
he won't even say abortion.
Yeah, I mean,
So
he's
that's a big thing right now with a lot of folks that are anti or an, pro-choice. I'm not saying getting the things mixed up. That are pro-choice right now is he won't even say abortion, and it's
mm,
like you won't even address it. Um, Meanwhile, there's these atrocities happening, and it's just it's hard. It's hard to wrap your brain around.
what does that mean, I guess, if just for him to recognize and actually say the words, like what does that do?
It puts, it's like a disease in a body. It for me, I have chronic pain from a car accident I was in when I was a teenager.
Mm,
And it took 15 years, almost, no, 13 years. It's been 13 years for them to find a name for the uh, the condition that I have with
mm-hmm,
chronic pain.
mm-hmm,
It's called myofascial trauma,
mm,
and it's for there to be someone willing to put a name and willing to say something out loud, it puts a real face on an issue. If you're not willing to talk about it, then you're just pretending like it's not happening, like it's
mm.
not there. But if you're willing to say it out loud, you're recognizing that it is a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I was wondering, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, so I just put out the question: is there a way of having any kind of balanced conversation with those who feel very strongly, who are pro-choice but also pro-life? Like, what is that? What is that balanced? Is there one? Is there a balanced conversation? And then what does that look like?
I would say that balanced conversation comes from people who are pro choice, not even from people who are pro choice but pro life or pro life. I think it comes from people who have had the procedure speaking out and telling their stories and putting a face
Mm.
instead of a number to the procedure. Whether it's the fact that the majority of women who have an abortion or people who have had an abortion are already parents
Mm.
when they have an abortion. That puts a level and a depth to the person who needs it as healthcare. I think that the more people who speak out who have had the procedure, the more that you're going to see a balanced conversation with pro life and pro choice people.
Mm.
Because it's not, there's this middle ground that I call pro option
Okay.
that that is for the life of the mother. And that's very much so, a pro choice way of thinking. But sometimes when pro lifers, or we call them anti choice now too, talk about abortion, they say that, they make choice sound like it's a pair of shoes that you're
Mm.
choosing. And so I've started calling it pro option because it's the only option that you have at the time to save your life, to end suffering, to make the only, or take the only option that you have to make your life better and preserve it.
Is there? Do you think there's a perception out there from pro-lifers that the whole thing about choice is that um, that those who are making those choices, it's like an easy one for them, that it's oh, I'll just abort this baby and that'll be in there and move on, kind of like, do you think that they perceive it as that, even though in reality, like, I and you spoke to it, in your story, but just to to actually, when you're in that moment, have to face that decision, right? And even if in your case, right, like, um with you, and there was a risk to your life, but there's probably a lot of women who maybe there's not a risk to their life, but they're
Mm-hmm.
still doing it for whatever reason. But to actually end a child's life, when you're in the the trenches of making that decision, I can't imagine that any woman would, or any person would, find that an easy choice to make. And it seems like there's a perception out there that, oh no, that these people probably made it was probably an easy choice for them, even they're pro-choice, and so therefore they're just going to choose and move on with it. I don't know if you have anything to say to that, but that's just my thinking on that.
Yeah, it's definitely the rhetoric that's going around,
Mm.
right? Is that it's just this easy, breezy choice, and it's just this easy, you know, easy route that someone can take if they have an unwanted pregnancy. And, it's people who are being raped.
Mm-hmm.
It's people who are have instances of incest. It's people who are having, um, you know, ectopical pregnancies. You know, it's these different people,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, is that they're people who are making one of the hardest decisions of their lives, and it's not some easy breezy thing, and it's not an in and out kind of decision. It's a all day affair. It's a even if it's the abortion pill, which you can take earlier on if if you need it for that reason, you know that's still an all-day affair
Mm-hmm.
to take the abortion pill and then feel the after effects
Mm.
of it. Nothing is an easy option for an abortion. And I think that people need to understand that and recognize that.
Yeah. In those cases that you mentioned, rape, incest, all these other ones, like surely there can be some common ground there, right? Where people can understand that it was of no choice of the person. You know, I remember, I think it was in, I want to say it was uh, Obama's first election campaign. And I think one of his speeches maybe was at the Democratic convention or something like that. But I remember him speaking to that surely there could be some common ground on those women who have been raped and have been impregnated due to incest or whatever. And but it seems like all common sense has gone through the window, even on these basic things. I don't know.
Yeah, you now have people saying, well, the person who raped you's family might want the
Yeah,
child. And it's like, why would I give my child to a family who recognizes rape as something that's okay? Like, um, it's just, it's mind-boggling,
oh,
the new and improved excuses to strangle out reproductive
yeah,
rights that they're coming up with.
yeah.
It's just crazy.
I feel like I've done a lot of sighing in this conversation more than any other conversation I've had. So my apologies for that. I
It's
also feel like I'm
okay.
not coming up with my words today. Have been like $2 words, and I haven't been coming up with anything sophisticated. So anyway, but
Oh no, you're okay.
uh,
It sometimes there just are no words, and
yeah,
the absence of words can be just as
yeah,
powerful.
totally. You're right. I wanted to before we get into we always ask two questions of our guests. Before we get into that, I just want to get your sense on like what's we talked a little bit about this, but what are some emerging factors or issues or things that you're seeing in this space? Like, what do you think that people is not on people's radars that maybe people need to know about or yeah,
This summer, so between May and
yeah,
August, is going to be key for reproductive rights in our
okay,
country. There are a ton of elections that are going to overturn reproductive rights in different states. So pay attention and register to vote and vote. And, you know, May, there's, I think there's different ones in Kentucky. There's, and in Louisville that's going on right now. In August, it's actually a primary election, like one that people normally don't vote in, is where they're sneaking in this
yeah,
bill in Kansas. So pay attention this summer and get registered to vote and keep reproductive rights strong in your area so that, people like me, people that need this as healthcare can keep it that way.
yeah, great. Where can people find your book?
On Amazon.
Amazon. Title again?
Yep. Face Everything and
Face
Rise.
Everything and Rise. Okay, we'll put a link to that in the
Yep.
show notes for sure, and to From the Green Desk as well. Are you okay if we move on to the last two questions that we asked our guests, or was there anything else that you wanted
Yeah.
to talk about?
No, jump in on that 50 states
Yeah,
challenge. It costs $30 to sponsor a state to send 3 books to each state's representatives. It just, yeah, like I said, I'm doing it at cost and at shipping cost. So I can't do it alone
mm.
though. It's like $1,500 for the whole United
Yeah,
States. So please help any way that you can. And I can also give you the link to that
yeah,
as
that'd be
well.
awesome. So that's two senators and a governor. Is that sort of the approach?
Yep, 2 senators and a governor, and then the Supreme Court and our president as
Wow,
well.
wonderful. I feel like if you were to tackle the entire Congress, that might be a little bit much.
That would be a little
Yeah.
much, yeah. I recognize my
Yeah.
limits, and that is where my limit
Stage
is.
two, phase two of this, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, phase
Yeah.
two.
Okay. All right. So first question that we give to our guests is their five for dinner question: dead or alive? Who are five people that you'd want to have dinner with? I mean, you could have them individually, you could have them collectively. Sometimes we ask if you were gonna have a meal, like what the meal would look like, if you want to get that into the weeds with it. But yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say I'd love to have dinner with the Obamas
Okay.
to to just understand their approaches to um, tackling the world that we're living in right
Mm.
now as people who have been there, done that, um, and ways to tackle it tactfully.
Mm.
I'd love to have dinner with the um, oh goodness, they call them the squad,
Yeah.
um, with our United States government, which kind of fills up the rest of my seats, but um, I'll just like count them as like one or two
Yeah. Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that the squad would be incredibly impactful and
Mm.
powerful to have dinner with. I'd also would
Just
love
so for people,
to,
just so for people's understanding, and I'm pretty sure
yeah,
I know who the squad is. We're talking about like there's I think four or five pretty progressive
yeah,
members of the United States Congress. We're talking about AOC and oh my goodness, I forget the other three. But is that's who
yeah.
we're talking about though, right? Okay.
Yes. Very progressive folks that are, and they're women that are making a lot of big changes and
Yes.
a lot of differences in our
Okay.
government. So I'd love to have dinner with them. Um, from a fun, um, silly standpoint, I would probably say, um, I'd love to have dinner with, goodness, now like, well, I don't know if it's silly so much, but I love Glennon Doyle and I love Brene
Yeah.
Brown, because they are making changes to um, the way our working sector goes and vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
and approaching life and becoming untamed. I'd love to have dinner with those two ladies. That, and I think they would just be a really fun
100%.
hangout. Like, and probably my last one would be my grandmother who has passed
Mm.
away. She not only would probably be the one cooking the meal, but she, and I miss her cooking, she was an incredibly powerful influence in my
Mm.
life. She was what the there's part of the Kansas City Chiefs, which is a football
Yeah.
team here, American
Yeah.
football, and they have a division called the Red
Mm.
Coaters, and they do philanthropic things out in the community. And so she was a Red Coater and really was very involved in her community and was a huge influence in my life, becoming, uh, you know, getting into that nonprofit
Yeah.
sector. So she would be my my last person that I would have dinner
Yeah.
with. I don't know if she would get along with everybody else at the table, but she would cook a damn good
From her,
meal.
you mean from like her
So
political views? You mean, or yeah?
yes,
Okay.
yes, from
I
her
figured that's what
political
it was
views,
because you got a
but
political powerhouse of a table. So,
yeah,
yeah, even including Glennon Doyle, I guess too. But
yeah,
yeah, that's a
yeah.
that'd
But
be a cool conversation to be a part of. Would you think you'd be kind of a fly on the wall, or is there stuff you would be really keen to ask or talk about?
um, I would definitely be one to just absorb
Yeah.
the the the
Mm-hmm.
gravitas and the viewpoints and the love in the room, and to be able to ask powerful questions. I that would be one of those conversations or one of those dinners where I come with like notes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that I don't get so far in awe that I forget what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
and forget to ask the questions.
The squad and the Obamas, particularly Barack Obama, but because obviously he's more on the political side, but just to have, that's a conversation I don't think we've ever seen, right? Because they came into politics, obviously, I think 2016 is right. So
Yeah.
they never really got to interact, but Obama's always had this kind of like, this is a big ship and it takes a lot of perspectives to move the ship. And he's not one to really go so far out on a limb on really many issues. And so to see a conversation between, the squad and Obama on several issues, I think would be fascinating.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I would definitely see that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Last question. Besides the circle of life, what do you know for sure?
I would say that there's hope in all of it. And that goes with my daughter Hope and the word hope. So no matter what piece of life you're in, what stage you're in, even if it's the hardest times and the darkest times, there's always hope, whether you're feeling the absence of it or the presence of it.
That's beautiful. That's
Thank
very
you.
nice. Thank you, Kelsey, for the conversation. I really really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, but it also, like I said, near the start, just having again a safe space, a safe environment to talk about some things I think that would normally, I would say, are sensitive for many people, but even for myself, because I've never had this kind of conversation. Thank you for that, and thank you for reaching out and willing to have this discussion. We'll put all of Kelsey's information in our show notes, where you can reach her, how to find From the Green Desk. Please buy her book, support the 50 state challenge, and just, yeah, again, appreciate your time and appreciate the work that you do. I can't imagine, we didn't really get into this, but you have all that nonprofit experience, but it's just like any entrepreneur, to start something is incredibly admirable, but especially in the not-for-profit world, where you're almost at the whims of so many other people to get you going, or not get you going, but at least to keep you afloat, right? Just financially and
Yeah.
everything, is, I can imagine, a great ordeal and a great challenge, and you're doing it from such a wonderful place. It's just brilliant. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I had today.
I did. I loved it. So thank you so much for having me and for holding this space so that we could have this
You
conversation.
bet. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you guys next time.